Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful, creepy human being you, and welcome to today's true crime episode. I'm so happy that you are here. I'm so happy that somehow in all of this that we're forced to deal with on the day today, you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing the survival story of Morgan Metzer. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. Now, before we get into the details of today's case, I first need to say a big thank you to the sponsor of today's video, and that is Aura. Now, I want to start this off with a question for you, okay? And the question for you is this. Have you ever Googled your name or the name of somebody you loved and been surprised to see how much of yours or their personal and private information was available on one of those public listing sites? Because when I tell you, it is far more common for your personal and private information to be leaked out on the internet than you would think. And that is because there are these things out there called data brokers who take your information and sell it to people that you really don't want to have it, like spammers and robocallers. Okay, do you ever get those texts that are kind of sketchy? Texts with people saying like, hey, reply yes, send me your link. But you're like, this feels like a scam. I am not down with that sickness. I value my privacy and I value your privacy. And that's why I want to introduce you to Aura. Now, I've got some good news for you and I've got some bad news for you, okay? The good news. Data brokers are legally required to remove your information if you ask them to. It sounds great, right? Except they make it super difficult for you to figure out which data brokers have your information. And that's one of the ways in which Aura comes in. They identify which the pesky data brokers have your information and they submit opt-out requests on your behalf. They do the work so you do not have to, which I love. Now, when I first signed up for Aura, one of the very first things I did is I went to the data broker opt-out section because I was just curious how many could have my information. And it turned out like 30. And Aura had already submitted opt-out requests on my behalf. Thank you, Aura. They also checked to see if your information has been leaked on the dark web. And if you know, no one wants their information leaked on the dark web. And they check to see if the passwords you use online for websites like your banking, where you hold your money, are secure. And those are just a couple of examples of how Aura helps keep you and yours safe online from threats that you just simply cannot see. Through just the Aura app, which is super easy to set up, you can get things like parental controls, antivirus, VPN, password management, identity theft insurance, and more. And you get it all in one place. There's no need for several different apps, and you get it all at one affordable price. It sounds like a great deal to me, but listen, I'm not your mom. I can't tell you what to do. But what I can tell you is I'm not going to leave myself and my family vulnerable to data breaches, and brokers. And if you don't want to either, you can go to my link, which is in the description box. It's aura.com/Bratterstein and get 2 weeks for free. And that 2 weeks is enough time for them to see if any of your personal information has been exposed. So if all of that sounds as good to you as it does to me, make sure to click the link at the top of my description box, which is aura.com/Bratterstein, to let them know that I'm the one that sent you, and get a 14-day free trial and see if your personal and private information has been leaked online. And if it has, let Aura help you put a stop to it today. Now, I just want to say a big thank you to Aura for partnering with me on today's video. It's partners like Aura that make it possible for me to put out videos as consistently as I do. And a big thank you to you guys for always being so supportive of all of my sponsors. You rock. Don't ever change. Now, with that, let's go ahead and get into this video. Now, this video is on a case that I had never heard of before, but as I started to read and learn about this case, I found it to be terrifying, but I also found it to sort of inspire hope because Morgan went through hell. She went through every woman's actual nightmare, and she came out strong on the other side. She is strong and she is alive. And in the years since the attack, she has tried to raise awareness, both about what happened to her that night, but also to what happened to her in the years leading up to that night. And her drive to raise awareness is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about her case today. So with that, today I'm going to tell you the entire story. I read all the things that you do not have to. And at the end of this video, I want you to answer the question of the day. I'm going to give it to you now so you can have it kicking around in your brain as we go through the details of this case. But of course, I want you to answer once we have something to go on. But the question of the day is this. Do you think that the person responsible for what happened to Morgan that night got enough time for the crimes they committed? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below after we go through the details of this case. Now, with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the survival story of Morgan Metzer. Our story today is going to begin in the very early morning hours of January 1st, 2021, and we are in the city of Canton, which is in Georgia, and is reportedly just like a very wonderful and beautiful place to live. It was on this early morning, and I do mean early morning. It was like before 2 a.m. at this time, that a man named Rodney, who went by Rod, showed up at the home of his ex-wife, Morgan's house. Okay? He gets to her house, he knocks on the door, and he gets no response. So he starts circling around the house, heading towards the back of the house, calling out her name. But he stopped once he got to the back porch because that's where he found her. Morgan was lying there on her back porch, partially nude with her hands zip-tied behind her back and a pillowcase over her head. So obviously Rod ran to her, gave her aid, asked her what happened, and dialed 911. When officers arrived at the home, they found that Morgan had been brutalized. She said that she had woken up that night to find a masked intruder standing in her doorway. And this masked intruder beat her, like pistol whipped her, okay? Choked her more than once to the point of unconsciousness, sexually assaulted her, and threatened to kill not only her, but her husband as well. Now, when police looked at this situation, it didn't make a lot of sense at face value. Like, Morgan was this young mother of two with a thriving business, and there was nobody that she had any real issues with. So why would anyone do this to her? Like, who would have a reason to want to torment her in this way? That's the question, right? But police pretty quickly believed they had an idea what happened here. And what they believed happened was shocking, because the conclusion they came to was that Morgan's savior that night, her estranged husband, was actually also her attacker. So Morgan and Rod, okay, they had been in each other's lives for more than 2 decades. They met when Morgan was just 14 years old and Rod was 17. And she herself has said that when the two of them met, it was love at first sight. It was almost scary how fast things moved between the two of them, especially considering how young they were and how perfect they just seemed to be for one another. He was said to have treated her super well. He called her his princess and he treated her as such. And the two were seen as having the perfect relationship. So it was no surprise to anyone when the two decided to get married in 2009 when Morgan was just 21 years old. So they had already been together several years by the time they got married. In the beginning, the two just seemed to have an awesome marriage, right? It was just the two of them. They were young. They were in love. They had just gotten married. They got to go on their honeymoon and then got to come home and have the post-honeymoon blues. And they just seemed to be so happy with one another, but their happiness didn't last long after they were married. And it didn't even seem to be issues in their relationship, at least on the surface. It didn't seem to be that their relationship wasn't good or that they weren't happy because they were in a relationship. Life just hit them really hard. And less than a year after the two got married, Rod's little brother died of leukemia when he was just 19 years old, which I truly cannot imagine. Rod was said to have been hit super hard with his brother's loss. Like, obviously that would be hard for anybody, but he took it particularly rough and seemingly never recovered. People who knew him, still know him, presumably, said that after Rod lost his little brother, he never went back to who he was when his brother was still alive. It was like he was a whole new version of himself. Now, I think that can be pretty normal. Like, grief can really change, like, the chemistry of a person's brain. And even if they had had time to recover, if Rod had had time to recover, he may never have changed, right? He may never have gotten to go back to who he was when his brother was alive because his brother was no longer alive and that version of him was gone. But in this case, it seemed like life just kept piling things on top of this young couple. Okay. So like, for example, the following year on March 15th, 2011, they actually had their first baby. It was a little baby boy, and they named him Kevin after Rod's brother Kevin, who had died. Now, this is going to be very upsetting and very triggering for some, I'm sure. But baby Kevin was born with a congenital heart defect and actually only lived for about 2 weeks, or 18 days to be exact. He died on what would have been his due date. And I truly cannot imagine what that's like. I can't fathom that sort of mixture of grief and wanting to be grateful for the time that you got, but also I truly can't even imagine. And Morgan herself said that that whole time was a blur and she has trouble even remembering that portion of her life. It just seems like so many things happen to this couple in such a short amount of time. You get married, you lose someone, you find out you're pregnant, you have a baby, you lose that baby. It's like whiplash. It's like emotional whiplash. And it didn't even stop there. 3 months after losing baby Kevin, the two found out that they were pregnant again, and this time with twins. And though life had been really cruel to them, right? A lot of horrible things had happened to them. They were super excited to have a second chance to be parents and to tell their family and their friends about their upcoming 2 little babies. The twins were born in 2012, and you would think that this would be like the best time for Morgan and for Rod. Like in theory, it would be that, right? But on paper and in practice, it was anything but. I guess on paper, it was a great time, right? Because in theory, on paper, this would be great. You just had 2 twins. Like you had your babies after losing your baby. That would be magic. But in practice, it was anything but. This was a seriously rough patch for this couple. It wasn't like things changed overnight. We sometimes hear in these cases, like one day it was just 100% different, but it was during this time that things started to change and the tension between the two of them definitely started to grow. Raising kids is hard. Newborns are hard, and they had 2 at the same time. I can't even fathom how tired they must have been, like how completely run down. Now, despite the fact that things really were not good from the outside, people who knew them thought they were still the perfect couple. But by this time, the mental abuse had already begun. And it seems that in hindsight, Morgan recognizes that Rod had always been a manipulative gaslighter. It wasn't during this time where it first sort of reared its head. This is just when it first really became clear to her. But I mean, think about it. She had been with this man since she was 14 years old. She loved him. She grew up with him. So she just didn't see the relationship she was in for what it actually was and who he actually was. She didn't see it as abuse in the beginning because it was like little things, right? Like he would berate her for forgetting to pick the kids up at school, even though she was certain that he was the one who said he would be the one that did it. And he just seemed to have this way of making every single problem the two had be her fault. So you take that fact that he was always manipulating her, always gaslighting her, and you take that and you add to the fact that around the time the twins turned 1, Rod lost his job, and this was the beginning of the end for these two. Rod had a bunch of jobs, but his main gig where he made most of their money and the thing that he was most into was day trading, which is actually how he ended up losing a ton of his money. And at the same time that his career was falling apart, Morgan's was booming. She was doing super well. She had opened an interior design company, and within no time, she and her company, which was called Shiplap and Sugar, they had become the main breadwinners of their home. Things were so good that Morgan was actually able to hire her best friend, Nicole, to work for her business. So she literally got to live everyone's dream of working with their best friend. Wait, is that everyone's dream or is that just my dream? I'm not sure, but that's what she got to do. And her company was doing so good that she even won the 2020 Reader's Choice Award around Canton for Best Interior Design. Now, around this time, this is when Rod seemed to change a lot, and the worst parts of him were brought to the surface. Or rather, I don't know if it said he changed a lot, or if it's that who he was under stress was magnified, and she was finally able to see who he was deep down, because it's around this time that the abuse, both mental and now physical, became much more in your face. It wasn't so, before it was more sly. It was more recon. He was doing it and she didn't know he was doing it. Now it was becoming more blatant and in her face. She said that one Labor Day weekend around this time, she and Rod were out at the lake. They were on a boat with some other couples, and they had started to fight. So they had gone back to their cabin where the fight continued. And it was that night that Rod hit her for the first time. And he didn't just hit her. He beat her up that night. Now, this was completely surprising for her because it was against everything that he seemed to stand for as a person. He had always been the type of guy that was for women's rights, didn't like to see women getting hurt, wouldn't even watch movies where it showed women getting hurt because he was so kind-hearted and sensitive, and that was totally against who he was presenting himself to be at his core. She said as soon as that happened, she knew immediately that this was a time that she needed to get out of this situation. It was like a light bulb moment had went off in her head. And she's like, oh, wow, this man that I love could truly hurt me. And she said while she was at the cabin that night, she actually called her dad to come and pick her up. Now, when her family, their friends, their loved ones learned what happened, Rod denied it. And what's super upsetting here is that Rod was able, I don't know what, I would love to sit, well, not really, I wouldn't love to hear this guy talk at all because I'm not super interested, but at the same time, I am a little interested in how he was able to do this because he was able to convince everyone, her friends, her family, well, not all of her friends, but her family, some of her friends, that he wasn't responsible and that Morgan had injured herself. He told them that when they were fighting, she was so upset and so hysterical that she was wailing about and hitting herself. And he said the only thing that he had done that might have injured her is when he was restraining her so that she wouldn't hurt herself further. He just said that she was acting crazy. And what could be very difficult for somebody to understand who hasn't been in this situation, which luckily I haven't, but I've read enough about these cases that it does seem to be more of a common thread than people realize, is that he was even able to convince her of this. He was even able to convince her that maybe this too was actually her fault. Now, the fact that he was able to convince her that she was at fault was super upsetting for some of her friends, the friends that did stand by her, did believe her, and did support her, who looked at her and saw that there were only marks on her body and no marks on his body. This was super upsetting for them to see her just fall back into believing him. Her life really started to spiral at this point, and she started to doubt her own reality because Rod was just gaslighting her. He was convincing her that all of the problems that they had in their relationship were her fault. He would start fights with her and then say that she was the one who instigated it and wholeheartedly seemed to believe that that was true. He would even try to convince their kids that she was a bad person, that she was making it so their family was having problems. At one point, he even rolled himself down the stairs and then told their children that she was the one who did it. Can you even imagine being in that situation? She felt like she was going insane. She literally said of this, and I quote, "He had me convinced I pushed him down the stairs. I did not. He made me feel like I was the aggressive one and the toxic one in the family." He was controlling her and abusing her and sexually abusing her too, though it took her a while to come to terms with the fact that that's what was happening, because while she was in the situation, she just sort of saw him as sexually aggressive and the type of husband who just wouldn't take no for an answer. But as she did the work later and really looked at the relationship, she realized no, she told him no. She would tell him no, and he would do things anyway. And so she came to terms with the fact that even though he was your husband, he did still violate you. So we're going to move on now to 2020. And it was at this point that Morgan had had enough and she had filed for divorce, and she was finally starting to feel like she was at peace. Her divorce was finalized in December of 2020. So she was finally able to just move on and was so excited to be able to just move on with her life. But that didn't mean that Rod was totally out of it. They had kids together, right? You can't totally be separate from a person that you have kids with in most situations, I would say is the case. But in this situation, definitely she could not, and she didn't want to. The two decided to stay friends so that they could co-parent together easily. They literally, right before Christmas, drove down to, I believe it is Florida, to go drop the kids off with Morgan's sister, I believe it was, after the holidays. And they went down and did this trip together to show that they were separated, but still cool. And then literally the same month that her divorce is finalized, as the new year is ringing in, here is Rod again being super cool, rescuing her from her attacker, or at least helping save her in the aftermath. Which, back to that, let's talk about exactly what happened to Morgan that night. So it was New Year's Eve 2020, which is very ironic because I did not plan it this way. I just happened to stumble upon this case, looked into the case and wanted to cover the case, but I am actually filming this video in the first week of January 2025. We literally just had the new year. And it's funny how things work out that way sometimes. But anyways, on this night of celebration, Morgan Metzer was going to be spending that evening with her best friend, Nicole. They were planning to stay in, spend the evening together, watch the fall drop, have some wine, just do the New Year's thing. But Morgan felt tired and she actually wanted to go home early. Now, Nicole, she protested. I could feel this conversation. Like if it was me and my best friend, I'm always the friend who wants to leave early because I'm always the one who wants to go to sleep. And I know the conversation they had. Like Nicole begged with her, pleaded with her, was like, why would you leave? We never get to see each other. This is supposed to be our like mom time free of kids. And we're supposed to do the thing as women and not just as snack bitches. But Morgan was like, listen, another thing that I value greatly that I don't get much when my kids are around is a good night's sleep. So she did leave. And man, this woman had every reason to be tired, right? She had just been through so much. She had had a rough year. She had just gone through with her divorce from Rod. And she had twins. She had 2 8-year-olds. They were almost 9 years old. And kids and life could just be so exhausting. So, even though this was her like one time to get to be social and it would be a lot of fun to stay till midnight and watch the ball drop and do all the things that one does on New Year's, she really valued the idea of getting some sleep. So she headed home, which let me tell you, I also value getting a good night's sleep and I would love to get one tonight. I am so tired. When she got home that night, it was before midnight and she just truly did not have it in her to even stay up at home to ring in the new year. So she went to bed. She says that she did end up waking up that night at like 11:59 when all of the fireworks and all of the yelling started to go off because of the New Year's Eve of it all. So she said that she got up, she gave her dog a New Year's Eve kiss, which is so sweet. And then she just went back to bed. She was like, okay, this has been great. 2020, here we are, and good night. So from there, the next thing that she remembered was just waking up in her room. And she woke up in her room because she just felt this sort of feeling that there was a presence in her room. And it was just after midnight. I don't know if I mentioned that, but she wakes up, she feels like there's somebody in her room. And as she turns and she scans the room, she finds that she is correct because there is a dark figure standing in the doorway of her room. She said that her eyes shot open as she took in this silhouette of a tall stranger. She said the person was dressed in all black, including a black mask that sort of looked like a Batman mask. She said it had like the ears that were at an angle. And she said that this person was standing like a soldier with their fists clenched, like they were ready to do something very specific. Like they had a mission and they were going to complete said mission. And she also said that they were backlit by a light that was on in the hall. So she just saw the silhouette of this Batman-looking person who looked like they were there to do something specific. And she said specifically of this, and I quote, "A downstairs lamp was on, so there was light coming from behind him. I screamed so loud. It's a scream that I don't think I can ever do again. It was so painful. Soon enough, he was on top of me." Before Morgan could even think, this man attacked her. He pounced on her, he hit her with the gun, he punched her in the face before turning her over onto her stomach and putting a pair of handcuffs that were made from zip ties around her wrists. Handcuffs that were already made specifically for this situation. They were pre-made and brought with this person. She said that the whole time this person was doing this to her, they would speak. They didn't speak a lot, but they would speak, and they would say things like, "You've done wrong and you're gonna regret it." And she said that though the person didn't talk much, every time they did talk, it was like they were disguising their voice. She could tell they were disguising their voice, and it sounded like they were trying to sound like Batman. The "swear to me," Christian Bale. We've all seen it. I mean, I don't know what generation of Batman you're from, but that's what this person was doing. So they had the Batman mask, they're doing the Batman voice, and they're clearly like trying to hide their identity, right? With the mask and the all black clothes and the gloves and the hoodie. Like all of it was clearly trying to hide who they were. Because maybe she would know who this person was if she saw them, like I'm just saying. So this man kept hitting her over and over, pistol whipping her, which sounds incredibly painful, and strangling her to the point of unconsciousness. She said on more than one occasion, she thought this person was strangling her and making it so she was going to be taking her last breath. She had said that there was a point where she literally thought that she was going to die and that it was the worst feeling in the world to know that you were going to be killed by somebody and that before being killed, you were going to be tortured by them. She said that while this was happening, she just felt like she was having an out-of-body experience. She felt violated and exposed and just kept thinking about her kids. Like, what would happen to her kids if she was to die right then, because this was just something that she had never thought of. She didn't have a will. She hadn't talked with her parents about this topic, right? She had never sat down and talked to them about the oh so important, but also often overlooked, like, hey, what would you like to have happen if you die? What would I like to have happen with my family, with my kids if I die? Because she was a young woman, and this is not the type of thing that young people think is nearby. And I can't imagine thinking about that while going through this hellish situation, because this person tortured her, okay, and sexually assaulted her. Now, initially when this was happening, though, she couldn't think of anyone in her life that would do this to her. There was nobody that she could be like, yeah, they'd have reason to hurt me. They have the capability to hurt me in this way. But despite that, she had this gut feeling the entire time that whoever was doing this was someone who knew her. She said she was in this situation and she thought over and over about like how she got here, what event in her life could have brought her to this place, and what could she have done at what point to have made someone angry enough to even do this. She said it felt like she had 50,000 tabs open in her brain all at once. So she's racking her brain. She feels like it's somebody that she knew. And she said she didn't think it was necessarily somebody that she knew, but somebody that knew her, because they seemed to just like have personal information about her. So were they stalking her? Were they watching her? How did they know these things about her? Because during this attack, even though she was single at this point, they were telling her like, you're going to miss your husband. She said that they kept saying different things, but that they told her like, you messed up, but you're probably going to be fine. But even if you are, we can't say the same thing for your husband. You're really going to miss him. And it was that statement that really stuck out in her head and in her mind. And in that moment, she said to herself like, oh shit, this person who's doing this to me is Rod, isn't it? Because why in the world would somebody else, why would any other person in the world say something so random to her? Now, her realizing this was Rod, or figuring out that she believed this was Rod, was something that she was able to use to her advantage to help keep her alive, because she knew in her gut that it was him. So she started trying to appeal to him without appealing to him, without him knowing she's appealing to him, right? She's telling him like, she's begging and she's pleading like, please don't hurt me and please don't hurt my husband. Like, I love him so much. She played this fool, and man, it worked instantly. She said the moment that she said that she loved him, the entire mood in the room changed. And she knew in that instance that she was fine, that she was going to live. And she said that her attacker at that point stopped hurting her and instead started looking around her room for things to steal. He was asking her where her valuables were, her jewelry, her money, whatever. And he started ransacking her room, looking for anything that had value, anything of value. They were trying to find it. He was trying to find it, not they. She was not involved. Well, she was involved in answering his questions, but you know what I mean. Again, she said at this moment, she knew she wasn't going to die. And she said specifically of this, and I quote, he started acting like an actual burglar and not a murderer. The intruder asked her for her phone and asked her for the passcode for her phone. And initially she was confused by this because she's like, what is he going to do? Is he going to get into my banking? Is he going to steal my money? But no, he wasn't. He wanted to access her security system. So Morgan had video cameras that were on the property. She also had like a code. I don't know why I said code like that. A code like on her door to get into the house. Right? And all of this was accessible from her phone, but she, he needed her passcode to get that because he needed to be able to get in and out of the house, and also wanted to delete that surveillance footage that was recorded by those cameras. Now, initially, she didn't realize this was what he was doing. He's getting into her phone. She doesn't know what's happening. But then she hears her back door unlatch. And she's like, oh my God, this guy literally used my own phone to disarm my own alarm system remotely. After that, the intruder took a pillowcase and put it over her head before picking her up off the bed and leading her out to the back porch. At this point, she was partially nude. She had her hands handcuffed behind her back with those zip ties, and he laid her down on her porch and told her not to move. She was not to move from that spot until she heard two car horn honks. And if she was to get up and try to move before she heard those honks, he would come back he would shoot her and he would kill her. So she did as she was told, and she just laid there. She just laid there and waited to hear the sound of the horn honking. And she said at that time she didn't know what was going on. She had that pillowcase over her head, so she didn't even know if she was alone. She didn't know if he was just standing there watching her to see if she would comply. And so she just laid there listening to a nearby stream until literally like more than 30 minutes had gone by, and she started to hear something else. Now, 30 minutes does sound like a long-ass time to wait, considering she didn't hear I cannot say that word. 30 minutes seems like a long time to wait, considering she did not hear the horn honk. Jesus Christ, I don't know why that's so hard for me to say, but it's worth noting that her house was pretty remote. This area in general was like filled with natural beauty and hills and places that you could hike. And her house specifically was pretty isolated with no close neighbors. So if they didn't park on her property and they had to like hike to their car, it could take a while. But this had been quite some time. By the time she finally heard this noise, it had been like 40 minutes. Though to her, it felt like it had only been 15, which sounds so crazy to me because you would think that it would feel longer, not shorter. But for her, that's what it was. She didn't even find out until later that it had been 40 minutes, not 15. And she had her mind like blown. But anyways, she starts to hear this noise. And the noise that she hears isn't the horn honking. It's the sound of footsteps getting closer and getting closer. And in that moment, she felt like it was the sound of her attacker's shoes walking back towards her so he could kill her. This honestly sounds terrifying. It sounds right out of a horror movie because she lays there and she hears the footsteps getting closer and closer. She hears them climbing the steps of her porch. She hears the familiar loud creak of a person standing on the top step. And then she hears something that was totally unexpected, right? And something that must have been comforting because it was a familiar voice asking her, "Oh, honey, what happened?" And again, this voice was very familiar to her. This was the voice of her recent ex-husband, Rod. To which I say, Rod? His name is Rod? Oh, that's a major appliance. That is not a name. But his name is Rodney, so whatever. Anyways, in discovering her, Rod calls 911, reports that there has been a break-in and that he had come to his ex-wife's house to find her outside, handcuffed with a hood over her head. While the two waited for the cops to arrive, Rod consoled her. She was hysterical, as I'm sure you can imagine, and just begged him over and over to stay there with him, not to leave her. And he was like, "Oh, I have fucking done it. She wants it. She loves me. She needs me. Oh, baby. Oh, baby." But in her head, she's like, "I just want you to be here when the cops show up because I know this is you and you're going to go to jail, buddy." So deputies with the Cherokee Sheriff's Department were dispatched to the 911 call at Morgan's house at about 2 a.m. And the detectives followed shortly thereafter, like the detectives that were going to be handling the case, right? Like the more elite police in the hierarchy of policing. Okay. They were going to be, they got there at 3. Okay. They got there closer to 3. The deputy sheriffs got there at like 2. And as soon as the detectives got there, Rod struck them as odd. He was sitting in his car near a patrolman. I don't know if they were talking or if he was just, he's sitting in his car. A patrolman's nearby. The detectives, they start strolling up and Rod asked them, like, "Are you the ones who are going to be looking into and solving this case?" And they're like, "Yes, sir, we are." And he was like, "Okay, well, do your fucking job." And they were taken aback by this. They were like, "Why? Okay, why would you, who just found the woman that you love tied up and beaten and assaulted, have the cops who are coming over to help you solve this case, why would you be hostile towards them? Why are you picking on me?" They found that to be very odd. It stuck out to them. Anyways, once the investigation into what happened to Morgan began, immediately the cops were looking sideways at Rod, even if he hadn't already been super weird when they first pulled up. When they started looking at the facts of the case, they were like, "This seems odd. Okay, like, why was this guy here? Why was he showing up at his ex-wife's house at 2 o'clock in the morning and just happened to find her in this condition?" So he was asked this, like, "Why were you here?" And he said that night he had been at his apartment because now that him and Morgan were divorced, he was living in an apartment. And he heard a rat-a-tat-rat, rap on his window. He says he looked out the window and he couldn't see anybody, but he heard somebody say Morgan's name. Now this, for whatever reason, unsettled him. So he tried to call his ex up on the phone, but she didn't respond. Okay, and that's because at this time she presumably would have been tied up face down on her porch waiting to hear, the two horns a-honking. And so they couldn't get a hold of her. He decided to just head over and make sure she was okay. It wasn't a big deal to him. He just lived 12 minutes down the road because he wanted to be close for his kids and also because he still cared about Morgan, so he wanted to be close by. Another reason police were specifically looking at Rod when it came to what happened to Morgan is how she was attacked. They get there, they see that she's beaten to the point that like her eye is swollen shut, and they're like, this feels emotional and personal, was what they were thinking. They were like, this attack came from an angry and emotionally driven person, not some random stranger who just broke into her house. So anyways, cops get there. One of the first things they do is they separate everybody, right? Because they want to talk to everybody separately. And by this time, the people who were there were Morgan, her father, and her brother, because she had called them, and Rod. And so police, what's the word I'm looking for? Sequester. I don't think that's right, but they do. They take Morgan and they take her separately and they talk to her. And as soon as she is away from Rod's earshot, as soon as she's alone with police, she tells them like, hey, listen, I think my ex-husband, my wonderful savior, is actually the one who attacked me here tonight, on this evening, the first day of our year of our Lord. She told the cop about what her attacker said about her husband, how she'd miss her husband, and how after she played into that, how the attacker started to act totally differently. And she also said that wasn't the only thing that made her believe it was Rod. She said the other instance that solidified in her mind that the person who was attacking her was Rod was when her attacker had picked her up off the bed to lead her out to the porch. She said that when he lifted her off the bed, it felt familiar because when she had been pregnant with her twins, Rod used to pick her up to help her out of their bed in a loving way. And she said that she just recognized his touch. And I mean, she'd been with him since she was 14 years old, since she was a literal child. So that held some weight, as he held her weight. Booyah. So she told the cops that when he got there to quote unquote save her, she just played along with it. One, because she wanted him to still be there when the cops got there. And two, because she was afraid to let him know that she knew it was him, because look at what he had already done to her. What would he have done if she had confronted him with the knowledge that she believed he did it? Now, why would Rod do this to her, right? That is the question. Now, we know that divorce can be hard on people. It can be particularly hard on an abusive man who's finally lost control of the partner he has been manipulating and abusing for years, right? That is something that we see time and time again. And we know that the most dangerous time to leave an abusive relationship is the most dangerous time for a woman is when she's leaving an abusive relationship. So all of that lines up. But it turns out that Rod also seemed to be having a bad week, and prior to this had gotten some bad news. Rod had called Morgan about a week before this happened and told her that he had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And I mean, his little brother had already died of leukemia. His dad had cancer. And she had seen him through those things. So I can't even imagine what getting this news must have been like for both of them. And you know what? She, being a good person, a person who still cared about this human being, even if she didn't want to be with this human being, was sympathetic to him. She was even letting him sleep on and off on her couch because he was in a bad state and needed emotional support because he was having a hard time with this diagnosis, obviously. And that sympathy she was giving him made him feel like he kind of had his foot in the door, and he started begging for her back. She described it as him nagging her to give him another chance and to let him try to be the man that she wanted him to be. But she told him she had no interest. And actually, by the 31st, she was actually over being his emotional support person too. She was like, listen, in her mind, and probably to him, listen, I'm not your wife anymore. I don't want to be this person for you. I don't want to be this rock for you. This is no longer my role. I care about you, but you need to talk to your family. You need to tell your parents what's going on. You need to have other people here for you. But he told her no. He said that he wasn't telling anybody else. He was only telling her. And it was at that point she told him he needed to leave. He needed to go back to his apartment and stop surfing her couch, essentially. She said that day he had gone back to his apartment. He lived at the Canton Hill Lofts. And while there, he was texting her over and over, still insisting that the two get back together. He told her that she needed to take him back, that he was going to be having this job where he's going to be making all this money and she can quit her job, etc., etc. Which I will say, it doesn't seem like she wanted to quit her job, dude. She had like built something for herself and she was happy sustaining herself. So like the offer of like, I'll work so hard, I'll make this money, you won't have to do anything, when really what would happen is you'd be taking away her independence when she wanted that. It doesn't seem like a compelling offer. Not that some people wouldn't want to like quit working and just be able to stay home and take care of the kids and have that be their lives. But that wasn't what she wanted. And he wasn't who she wanted. He even went to her home, though, the night she was attacked while she was out at Nicole's, and he put a check for $56,000 under her doormat. Okay, he took a picture of this check, he sent it to her, and he just said, like, he wanted her to have it all. She should have all of his money. She deserved everything he had and everything he was. Though it is worth noting that this check was taken by the attacker. They knew to look there for this check. Now, something that police found odd is that Rod would have gone to Morgan's house at all, even if he was worried about her. And that's because after she asked him to leave and he went back to his apartment, he was texting her over and over. She told him, like, listen, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to my parents' house for New Year's. I'm going to be spending the night there. I'm turning my phone off. I need to clear my head. So why would he have even gone to her house to attack her if she said she wasn't going to be there that night? That's where this check comes into play. They believe that he went there and he put the check and he sent her that photo to lure her back to her house, because who would want a $60,000 check to disappear overnight while you're spending the night with your parents? I mean, I don't know about you, but that would absolutely motivate me to come home from a night of New Year's Eve partying. Not that I personally party anymore. For me, it's more of a movie night and apple cider night with my worm. And by worm, I mean my child. So that sounds weird. I call Charlie a worm, and I call my husband, it doesn't matter. That's the kind of night that I have. So I'd already be home. But in her case, I could see how $60,000 could motivate one to get their butt into gear and to get home that night. Oh man, and you know what's so funny? I almost forgot about this point, but you know what's so funny? Police actually looked into his finances, and he didn't have that money. If she had cashed that check, it would have bounced. He did not have $60,000 to give her. So I don't know what the plan could have been for that money, if not just to lure her into thinking it was there when it wouldn't have been there anyway. So good thing the attacker took the check. Now, back to that night. When Morgan told the cops that she believed Rod was responsible, she was scared. She was scared that they weren't going to take her seriously, that they weren't going to believe what she was saying. I mean, she had spent years being conditioned into believing that she was unbelievable. He was able to convince people in her life, and even her. He was even able to convince her that she was the problem, that she wasn't an honest person. So how was she going to convince the cops that she was telling the truth? You know what I mean? But when Morgan spoke her truth, she was shocked to find that the cop believed her. The cop straight up told her, like, listen, I know a narcissist when I see one. And she said at that moment, she felt like she melted because she was finally being heard and acknowledged, and she hadn't had that in years. No one had seen her, seen what she was going through, trusted her and believed her. And this guy had. So with that, police decide they're going to try to corroborate or tear apart Rod's story about what happened that night. And they were going to start doing that by looking at his phone. Because remember, he said the whole reason he was there is that somebody came a rat-a-tat-tatting on his window and whispered Morgan's name, and that he got worried. So he tried to call her before coming over. So they wanted to get his phone to look into the records to see if that was true, if that call ever even happened, and also to see what else was on it, you know. So they get his phone, and before they can even confirm or deny if this call was made, they found something else in his phone that was disturbing. And it was an entire folder of photos of Morgan in various states of undress. Some partially nude, some fully nude, but in all of the images, it looked like she wasn't looking at the camera. Like, it didn't appear she knew they were being taken. And this wouldn't be completely weird because the two were married. They were together a long time. Him having nude photos of her, not that strange. But again, it didn't seem like she knew these photos were being taken. And when you looked at the dates, it seemed like they were taken during that week that he was surfing on her couch. So he was taking these nude photos of her without her consent. And in addition to that, Rod also had taken photos of Morgan's phone. So he had been going through Morgan's phone and looking at text conversations she was having with other people, specifically other dudes, and taking photos of these conversations to look back on later. Now, police, they're looking at his phone right then, right there in the early morning hours at Morgan's house after this attack. So they find these photos and they go to her and they're like, okay, do you know these photos exist? Did you give him permission to take these photos? And she was like, what the fuck? No. So the cops go to him and they're like, hey, bro, this is a serious invasion of privacy. You two are not together. She did not give you permission to take these photos. And this is some serious stalkerish behavior, bro. And then the cops tell him that they don't even believe his story of why he was there that night. And one cop straight up told him, quote, there's no way in hell that somebody knocks on your window and said her name and you immediately come over here because you're going to check on her. And she just happens to be bound with a pillowcase over her head by a man who's disguising his voice. And he just responds by saying that he spoke his truth, essentially. So they're really thinking that Rod is responsible for what happened to her here, but they don't know that for sure yet, and they need to investigate further. But in the meantime, they want to keep him in one place. And so, like we see in so many cases, when somebody is being suspected of something else, but they don't have evidence for that yet, they get arrested for something smaller that they did. And so they actually take him and they arrest him for taking those photos of Morgan without her consent. And she literally could not believe this was happening. And she was so filled with rage. Now, while he was arrested, police started to put together their theory of why he went on to do what he did to Morgan. And to me, it seems pretty obvious as to why he did it. She was pulling away and he did not want to lose her. But they also believed that, one, he wanted to be her savior. And two, he wanted to make her feel like she was in danger if she wasn't with a man. And he could be that man to keep her safe. Which, man, it's horrifying the lengths that he would go to keep her around. But we do know that when women leave abusive relationships, that is she's just lucky. Not lucky because what happened to her is horrific, but we know from other cases that it could have been worse. And we find out by looking at evidence in this case that his plan was going to be worse. Now, initially police thought that this was going to be super easy to prove that Rod did this. In addition to everything else they already had, they also had cameras on the property. So whoever did this, Rod, would be recorded and maybe something on the recording could prove that it was him. But when they went to recover this video surveillance footage, they found that it had been deleted through the app on Morgan's phone because remember, he took her phone. He got the keypad. He got her PIN pad to get into the phone. Then he got the code. He used the code to open the door. And while in there, he also deleted the video footage. And that right there was another red flag that it was him because how would a random intruder know to even do this? And, not only were they erased from her phone, which was never recovered, by the way, but they were also deleted from the cloud. Now, another thing her attacker miraculously knew how to do was to get into her house because Morgan had sensors on all of her windows. And if a window had been open, it would trigger the alarm, etc., etc. But there was one window that had a sensor. It was the basement window. It was one of the lower windows. It had a sensor. And somebody had removed that sensor so that the window could be open without tripping the alarm prior to the break-in. And it was done from the inside. From the inside of the house. And who I ask, had access to Morgan's house who could have moved that sensor from the inside? Rod. Because he was staying there, sleeping on her couch, being pampered after getting his cancer diagnosis. Anyways, the day after Rod was arrested, the police were able to get search warrants for his apartment and for his car. And inside his apartment, they found some very interesting things. I mean, they found interesting things in his car as well. They found a knife. No, they found a gun. And then, when they got into his house, they found all kinds of things that pointed towards the planning of this attack. For example, they found a book written by someone named Doug Fields, and this book was called 7 Ways to Be Her Hero, the one your wife has been waiting for. And in his browser history, they also found that he was looking up things like how to change your voice, how long to choke someone unconscious, making someone pass out, how to crack an iPhone password, how to get sympathy from your ex, how long before you starve to death, and cancer letter from hospital. Bro, homeboy did not have cancer. And the audacity of somebody to do that, especially somebody whose brother died of leukemia. What a terrible piece of shit person. I'm just going to say it there. And like, he really did his best to make this seem legit. He made up a fake email address for a fake doctor so he could email himself a fake cancer diagnosis, dude. He even had a fake hospital bill made up, all of these things so he could show Morgan so he could get her sympathy and win her back. To which I ask, what was the next part of your plan? You get her back. You think she's not going to like that? I'm healed. Like, how is this going to work for you, guy? And dude, police questioned him about this too. And they sort of lead into it in like a clever way, which you see in interrogations. They ask him about his health history and they're like, you have diabetes, right? And he's like, yeah. And they're like, do you have any other health issues? And he's like, nothing that I know of. And the cop like sits back and he's like, I thought you had cancer. And that's when Rod sits back and is like, yeah, I don't think I should talk to you guys anymore. But then proceeds to talk a lot more. He tried to like feel this cop out and try to act like a body language expert by telling this detective that he can tell every time the detective's agitated because he like scratches his face. And the detective tells him like, listen, I am 100% not agitated. To which I'll call a little bullshit because I feel like Rod is an agitating person. Anyways, during this question, Rod seemed to be, or at least pretended to be, shocked. He said it was sickening to him what had happened to Morgan. And it was even more sickening to him that they believed that he could have anything to do with it because he was very kind and he was very gentle and didn't have a mean or violent bone in his body. They push forward though and they ask him like, okay, was there a time recently when you were looking into how to change the sound of your voice? And he was like, oh yeah, yes I was. And they were like, why? And he said because he didn't think his voice sounded manly enough. They then tell him they found something else that was very interesting in his apartment. And this is something that you and I, yes, you specifically, you have not even discussed yet. Zip ties. Now, you may remember that I mentioned that Morgan was wearing a pair of homemade handcuffs that were made out of zip ties. And they were unique because they had 2 extra heads on the zip ties because they had been cut up and customized to fit her and be made specifically for this occasion. So when police were in his house and they found zip ties, they were like, oh, this is very interesting, especially when they found 2 pieces of tails that were pieces that had been cut from 2 heads of zip ties, like the ones that were on her handcuffs. And police are thinking just that. Could these 2 tails be from the 2 extra heads that were on Morgan's handcuffs? Maybe so, and they were determined to find out. Like puzzle pieces from the clay, the striations on the zip ties showed that they were a match. These zip ties that were found in Rod's apartment were confirmed to have been used to make the handcuffs that were found on Morgan that were used in her attack. Now, when police found these zip ties, they knew they were going to be adding additional charges. And during their interrogation with him, they go to him and they're like, hey, so what about those black zip ties in your apartment? And he was like, oh, I don't have any zip ties. I don't know what you're talking about. You're crazy. And they were like, oh yeah, you're right. You're right. You don't have them. We have them now. And they are identical to the ones that were on Morgan's wrist. But in response to this, he just says, okay, things are getting a little squirrely. And then over and over, he just says like, something funny is going on here. Something funny is going on here. And he refused to admit that they were his zip ties. Like he denied having zip ties tooth and nail, even though they were literally found in his apartment. And bro, he just like wasn't that smart because he was also caught on surveillance buying said zip ties. They could see his dumb face buying the zip ties. When they got the bag of zip ties from his apartment, they were able to use the scan bar to see that they were purchased from Lowe's. So they go to the 2 local Lowe's near where he would live, and they search transaction history until they find his purchase. And they found that he bought these zip ties on December 30th, 36 hours before the attack, and he used his debit card. And it wasn't even just that, dude. This was 2020. COVID city, bitch, and everyone was wearing masks, but not Rod. Not Rod. He was just bare balls, bare face to the world, to the cameras, buying zip ties to use in a crime. He's just so dumb, and it's crazy to me because in reports about this case, they call him like a master manipulator, and I'm like, a manipulator, yes, but he's like a little dumb, no? But like literally, the assistant DA who later took on this case said Specifically, quote, "This man is a master manipulator. In the days leading up to this attack, he faked a cancer diagnosis in an attempt to gain sympathy from his ex-wife. When that didn't work, he created a convoluted plan that the investigators in this case and our office truly believe involved a plot to kill her and then himself. When he couldn't go through with that plan, he instead devised a new plan to rescue her. Fortunately, Sheriff's Office investigators saw through this scheme and quickly arrested the defendant. Because, yeah, dude, I didn't mention this yet, but when they searched his apartment, they also found a note. And this was a goodbye note because he planned to kill Morgan and then kill himself. But she was able to save herself that night, dude, by appealing to him and pretending that she loved him because this asshole was going to kill her. This asshole was going to leave his kids as orphans. But anyways, I digressed a smidge. So anyways, he's caught on camera buying these zip ties. That was the point before the digression. Is digression a word? I think so. Anyways, but he's not, so he's caught on camera there, but he's not caught on camera at his own apartment complex. You remember how he said he was at his apartment and he heard the knocking on his window and somebody said Morgan's name? Didn't happen. We already knew it didn't happen, but it definitely didn't happen because he wasn't even there at that time. He wasn't caught on camera. He wasn't there. You know when he was caught on camera at his apartment, though, was after Morgan's attack. Shortly after Morgan's attack, he is seen returning to his apartment looking all fucked up, all manners of disheveled. He hurries in, is inside a very short amount of time, 4 minutes before coming back out, cleaned up, in new clothes, carrying a bag, like a plastic bag. And they never did figure out what this bag was. They weren't able to recover it, but they believe it was evidence from the crime. So he was already arrested. They didn't need to arrest him again. But now they were going to be adding additional charges. And these additional charges were home invasion, possession of a firearm, armed robbery, aggravated assault by strangulation, burglary, kidnapping, battery, simple battery, sexual assault, and false imprisonment. And he was being held without bail. The day after these charges were added, Morgan and her best friend Nicole came to the police department to speak with detectives. And she told them how she really truly thought she was going to die that day, but she did everything she could and was as strong as she could be because she wanted to survive and be there for her kids. They told her that they had watched the surveillance footage from around her house. They were able to recover, not recover the footage of the attack, but they were able to, they still had the footage rather, when Rod came back to her home looking for her. So they recount what it looked like when he found her. They said he went to her front door, he knocked on the door, and then he went and just walked around the house calling her name. And they found this all to be really, really strange, especially that he was walking around to the back of the house calling her name because, how would he have known she was there? First off, she wasn't even supposed to be there. So you'd think if you really thought she wasn't there because she said she was going to be at her parents' and you knock on the door and she doesn't answer, you would just be like, oh, she's not there. But instead he walks around the house and is calling her name like he knew she was going to be outside. Now, those who knew Rod were shocked, okay? His mother, who was actually the person that he called her 2 days after he was arrested, said that she was just floored. There had to be a mistake. Rod would never do this. And that's exactly what he told her. He's like, I would never do this. Why is Morgan doing this to me? The audacity is strong with this one. But truthfully, in the beginning, Morgan went back and forth. She had trouble coming to terms with the fact that he was responsible and thought that maybe it was someone else that did this to her. When she sat and she thought on it, she's like, maybe it wasn't him. I mean, he had made her question her own mind and judgment for so long. And plus, this is such an impossible thing to believe that someone you loved would do to you. And that she was like, maybe it was someone else. There's no way he'd do this to me. He wouldn't hurt me. She said she married this man. She thought he was her forever. She loved him. She had kids with him. Kids who had been with her sister. Remember, they were dropped off with her sister, and kids that stayed with her sister longer so that she could stay home and heal. She didn't want them to come home because they were almost 9 years old at this point and see the bruises on her and be worried and ask questions that she wasn't ready to answer. She said that once her kids finally did come home, she had to sit down with them and have this impossible conversation of telling them that their dad wasn't going to be around anymore. She had to sit there and figure out how to tell these kids this without really telling them. Because why? You don't want to tell your kids that their parent did something terrible, especially at the age of 9. Like, you want them to be able to be as young and innocent for as long as possible. So she just sat them down and told them, like, you know how when you do something wrong, you get punished? Well, Daddy did something wrong. Daddy did something very wrong. Daddy hurt Mommy, and now he's not going to be around for a very long time. And it's not that he doesn't love you. It's just that he can't be here because he's paying for what he's done. And that was rough, man. The whole aftermath was rough. Morgan, for months, couldn't sleep. For years, she struggled with nightmares, where she would hear like that stupid Batman voice, and it would terrify her. And in the first few weeks after this happened, she often kept her kids home from school because she just could not be alone and could not be without them. Anyways, the case against Rod was overwhelming. Like, the DA was not worried about getting a conviction here because of all the evidence they had, but the DA, quote, wanted to give Morgan the opportunity to get closure faster than a trial would bring. That's a loose quote. Basically, they asked her if she would like to offer Rod a plea deal where he would plead guilty, he would be behind bars, but they wouldn't have to go to trial. They wouldn't have to go through all the trauma of a trial. And after weighing the pros and the cons, she agreed. They took this plea deal to Rod, and he quickly accepted. I mean, I feel like he had to know his goose was effectively cooked, right? And I feel like, I don't know, it's a lot of politics, right? And it's a lot of trying to save money as well on not going through with the trial. So I think that had something to do with it, but that's just my opinion. I don't know. I wasn't there. But, you know, I feel like when the DA is like, hey, let's make a deal, even though there's like overwhelming evidence, it's like, why? Why wouldn't we want to put him into jail forever and ever and ever? But, you know, it's also complicated because this is her children's father, etc., etc. 8 months after her attack on August 4th, 2021, Rod pled guilty to 14 charges related to the attack on Morgan and the photos that were taken without her consent. Now, during this hearing, she was able to give a victim impact statement, and it was pages and pages long. And once she started talking, it just started to pour out of her. And she said to him, in part, and I quote, Rod, not only will this statement be to my attacker, but it will also be my last words to whom I thought was the love of my life. The last 4 years being married to you was like living with a monster that constantly tried to break me down and fence me in. It was a blessing in disguise. I can now walk with the confidence knowing that the pain you have given me has turned into power. She said that during the trial, she made sure that he looked her in the eyes while they talked about what happened. And she said that after she gave her victim impact statement, she felt like 1,000 pounds were lifted off her shoulders. She was a whole new person. It felt good and it felt empowering to know that she had had the last word. She said as horrible as this whole ordeal was, it was a way to show the world who he really was, to pull the blinders back and let people see the real him, because for years he had been so good at making it seem like everything was her. She was to blame. She was a bad person. Everything was her fault. And now they knew that wasn't the case. So with that, Rod's going to be serving 25 years on a 70-year sentence, which essentially means when he is released in 25 years, he will have 45 years of probation. That's 45 years. Whew, that's a long time. That's basically his whole life, right? And, you know, it's a lonely existence, especially because at the time of the filming of a 48 Hours episode on this case, which I watched, Rod still hadn't really been seeing many people in prison. He didn't even let his mother come and visit him. She wants to go, right? She wants to go, but he is nervous about what she will think when she sees him because of all the shameful shit he has done. Like, think about it. She lost a son to leukemia and he lied saying he has cancer. That's some pretty shameful shit to do. But she does want to see him. She's very worried about him. She's worried that he's going to die in prison. I guess he has type 1 diabetes, and I don't know much about the types, but I know that they're no joke. And she said that his health has been rapidly deteriorating since being in jail. Jail? Nope. Prison. But even if he doesn't, let's say he survives prison and he's released after 25 years. That's still 25 years, dude. And even if he's released, he's not allowed to contact Morgan and her kids, his kids. Look at the existence he created for himself. The earliest he could be released is 2046. And even then, Morgan says that in her eyes, this is a death sentence because her husband is dead to her. As far as his kids, it's hard to say how they feel about him, right? Like, he can't reach out to them, so it'd be up to Morgan to bring them to him, and she's not about to do that. She did sit down with the kids and they discussed it, and she doesn't think it's in their best interest to see him, whether that be just because he's in jail or just because of who he is as a person. I can't be sure, but she said that when she talked with them, she said that when they're 18, if they have interest in seeing him, that is on them. But even at this point, when she's talked to them, they don't really seem to have a lot of interest in seeing him. And what's really sad here is with time, they're kind of seemingly forgetting him and have even asked what he looks like. Now, as far as Morgan goes, she has taken steps towards recovery. You know, she's in therapy and focusing on raising her kids, and now, you know, a totally single mother. She also uses her time to help others in similar situations. Her story was adapted into a Lifetime movie called Gaslit by My Husband, which I haven't watched myself, but I know that she worked alongside the production team in making it, which means it could have some validity in like how accurate it is, but also when those types of things are created, there's oftentimes a lot of creative liberties taken, like even with true crime cases. I don't know if you guys know this, but that one, for example, there's a specific true crime channel or show. It's like Yellow. Is it Oxygen? No. The Yellow one. You know what I'm talking about. If you don't, I'll try to remember to put it on the screen, but they take creative liberties when talking about true crime cases, which is just interesting to me, but in like a bad way. But either way, she did create this movie. She did help them create this movie because she wanted to get her story out there to more people, and also even wants to write a book to get her story in the minds of more people. I was going to say in the eyes, or the ears, but it would be the eyes and it would be the mind, because books, reading. I guess audiobooks is ears. Either way, she wants more people to hear her story. She said whenever she tells her story, whether it be through interviews or when her movie was announced, her inbox gets flooded with messages from women who either were or are currently going through a situation just like hers, because there are so many people going through this. She said she wants to raise awareness, which is partially why I decided to tell her story. She said she wants to raise awareness around narcissism and gaslighting and wants to help women get out of these situations before they get too far. She just doesn't want any other woman to have to go through what she went through that night. And with that, my friends, is the survival story of Morgan Metzer. I hope you found it to be informative. I hope I give you all the information you would want when looking into this case. And of course, I just want to thank you for hanging out and remembering Morgan with me today. Now, considering everything I told you throughout this video, I want to revisit the question of the day, and that was this. Do you think, given what Rod did, he was given enough time in prison for his crimes? Like, do you think a plea deal was appropriate, or do you think he should have spent more time behind bars? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below, because I'm curious to hear what you think. Because I know it's, with a family dynamic, it can be kind of confusing and it can be more difficult to come to that conclusion. So I'm just curious to hear what everybody thinks. Now, before you leave, please don't forget to leave me a comment down below with whatever case you'd like to see me cover in the future. As you know, I have a long list of cases, but whenever you leave me a suggestion, I put it on my list with your name next to it. So if I cover it, I can give you a shout out. I love looking into the cases you guys suggest, because they're often cases I haven't heard of or cases that need more coverage. And I know you're filled with great ideas and great taste. Otherwise, you would not be here. If you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack, if you become one of us. One of us. And if you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is listed down below, along with a link to my membership and a link to my merch store. If you've made it this far, I just want to remind you that I now have a podcast version of my true crime episodes, right? Like, I take the audio from my YouTube channel and I put it without ads, mind you, for the time being, unless they want to sponsor me, which would be amazing. But right now it's without ads on any podcast platform. Just search True Crime with BRATTERSTEIN. And if you want to listen, that would be great. If you want to share and comment and, you know, all the things to get me out in the algorithm, that would be even better. And I would appreciate you endlessly, as I already do. And now, with all that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and be a better person than you were yesterday. I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.